because they're saying that all lives matter, and while that should be the case, it really isn't.
So how do you counter that? How do you get past that roadblock in the conversation?
I have a very hard time with it. I've been very upset by people that I thought I knew on. I've got lifelong friends on Facebook that I just can't hardly stand to see their political posts anymore because of how hateful they are. And and a lot of that has to, a lot of it has to do with the racial, undertones and everything. Like, for instance, I see a lot of I see a lot of really nasty things written about Kamala Harris, and I have to believe that part of that is racially motivated, and I don't know how to get past it, because these are people that I've known my entire life, that I love dearly, and I personally, I usually just like stay away from all discussion with them, because I don't want to ruin my friendship with them, because the friendship is more important than the politics. But at the same time, I'm so deeply hurt that this person that I thought I knew, that I've always known to be very loving and and Christian and loving and all of that, and to see such hateful things come out, it's really, it causes me a lot of stress. It really does. I stay away from I try to stay away from Facebook a lot these days, because it just gets me too wound up.
So I've tried, because, I see things where people say, if you say BLM or Black Lives Matter, and they come back, but all lives matter. No, all lives matter.
Right.
I've tried having that conversation with a few people that are friends, and I've found that it just, they have this block. They don't want to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used the same argument, but here's the thing. Historically, Black lives haven't mattered. Racism has been around a long time. It's still here. Kinda, for a while there, I actually kind of felt like things were moving forward, until the last 4 years. Well, you know what? I take that back. Until Obama was elected.
Yeah.
And then those, hardcore racists, they couldn't help themselves. They had to speak out and start posting those ugly things. So, that's been happening a long time. I don't know what the answer is, though. I mean, you try to, it's like, should you have that conversation with them to try to help them understand? But it gets very frustrating when they won't listen to you,
Mm-hmm.
it's a block there, and I don't know how to get past that.
So the only thing I've done around here, and it happens a lot, right? You get people wearing the mask with the blue line, and maybe they have a valid reason for wanting to wear it. But the only thing I do for a lot of people around here is I just ask questions. I don't ask pointed questions. I don't really want to get into the let's get angry at each other. I just ask questions. What's so offensive about the actual movement? Black Lives Matter. You're not a part of it, that's fine, but what's so offensive about it? And typically I get no response other than they're tearing things. I was like, look, you may have negative people, you may have people doing something bad on all movements, all statements, but I'm just asking a question of what actually offends you about it? About the idea that Black people have been held down for so long, and this is just a movement to try to get people to understand that. What's so wrong with that? And usually the conversation ends with people walking away, and I'm okay with that as long as we're not getting mad. We're not getting to a point where it's just yelling and getting angry at each other. Nobody wins. And the only thing I do with a lot of people is just ask questions where they actually have no answers. There's no answer. And you can just kind of walk away and say, okay, I just hope you go and read or learn, something. That's what I do around here in Houston.
I think it's interesting though, because I thought the first chapter or the introduction of White Fragility was interesting. I've never thought of individualism as a bad thing. So I mean, and I think that is where, I think a lot of defense when they talk about the BLM movement, and people then go into that and they revert back into their experience and they revert back into their individualism. So I think it's really hard to understand. But I thought that was interesting. I never thought of it, in my life, individualism has always been kind of talked about as a good thing. So when she started talking about it as a negative, that was an eye opener to me.
Yep, I
I
agree.
haven't actually started reading the book yet, so I need to do that. But I see what you're saying about individualism. I've never thought of it as a bad thing either, so I'm looking forward to seeing what she has to say.
Well, even the simplest, you don't know beautiful if you don't know ugly. Like, you have to, there's a basis, and this has all come together, but we only know what we've experienced. So,
Right.
like, has individualism always been a bad thing?
That was the first time I'd run across kind of the negative part of that.
Yeah.
Besides,
I think in the intro, it's interesting also, and it definitely pegged me on a few things. When I was younger, I would have said I have no white privilege because I didn't grow up in a family that had a lot of money. So I would have never understood. Plus, at that time, I didn't even know any people of color, or, they just weren't part of my life at all. So I always had that impression of, I'm not privileged because we don't have a lot of money. So, and that is not true, because my life has been shaped by, definitely shaped in a different way because I had white parents and grew up in, I'm not even going to say primarily, I'm going to say all white. I mean, I think we had one or two people of color in our schools. So I know I definitely benefited from that experience, whereas others, may not have.
I hear from a lot of my friends who have that same idea that white privilege is not a thing if you've been poor and you've had to work for everything all your life and everything. So how in the world can you say that you've got you're not I'm not privileged because I've had to work so hard for everything that I have, and so, and I've heard that so many times, and I've tried to explain that it has to do with you're looked at by society in a whole different way if you're white than if you're black. If you've never gone into a store and had someone following you around because you might be stealing, then that's part of your privilege. The fact that I've got 4 boys and I've never once had to have the talk with them about what to do if you get pulled over by the police. You got to keep your hands on the wheel, and make sure that you let them know if you're reaching for anything and that sort of thing. I've never had to have that talk. And, that's part of my white privilege. When I, think about what Black parents go through, every time their child leaves the house, wondering, um, and I mean, I've even, like, my oldest son has had some run-ins with the law a few times. When his father died, he had a very difficult time getting through that, and he's doing really well now, but he has spent some time in jail because of different things he's done and everything. But during that entire time, when he was getting into trouble because of, like, drug use and stuff like that, and but I never feared that he would somehow get killed by the police type of thing. Never had that fear. And whereas Black people, Black kids, they get pulled over and jailed and treated wrongly for the smallest of things. So I can definitely see where we've had privilege that
Yeah. One of
Black
my
people, people of color don't have.
one of my sailors in my reserve unit, I had a reserve unit full of state police that also worked as military police in the reserves.
Mhm.
And he told this story. He said, I never understood the concept of white privilege and all that. He said, I thought it was just a bunch of nonsense and socialism. But he goes, one day, he goes, I was in my civilian car riding with he had an African American girlfriend and he was white. And they were going down the interstate. And at a certain point south of Fayetteville, there's kind of a speed trap in Winslow. Doesn't matter. But he said, when we passed by there, the local deputy sheriffs were sitting out there. And he goes, they saw my girlfriend's arm hanging out the car window where they could see it. And he goes, they pulled us over. And he goes, in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to tell them who I was. I just wanted to see how this played out. And he said, 3 cars showed up. They made him get out of the car. For 30 minutes, they harangued him and never once said why they pulled them over. And he said, in that moment, my eyes were open to how we treat minorities and people of color. And then he said the next day, he went back through there with his state trooper car and arrested all 3 of them and put them in jail and told their boss, if you want them, here's where they are. But he said that was the moment it was brought home to me that there was no reason at all for us to be pulled over except for the fact they saw the color of my girlfriend's skin. And he said that just really bothers me. And
So a lot of y'all, sorry.
Go ahead.
So a lot of y'all don't know me. So my background is that I was married and we were together a long time and then married for 22 years to a Black man, Ernie, and he passed away in 2012. But we started dating in 1990 in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and never in a million years did I think that things like that would happen. I didn't know. I mean, I've always had Black friends and people of color as friends growing up and everything. But the same thing, like he was driving one day, we're going down Central Avenue, and this was when we first started dating. Not speeding, didn't do anything wrong, but a couple of white cops pulled us over. And the first thing he said to me was, don't say anything, because he knew it was going to tick me off, just because we got pulled over. And he knew my reaction because I knew we hadn't done anything wrong. So he was like, don't say anything. I've got this, just be calm, whatever. They didn't ticket us. They really, he said that he didn't use his blinker or something stupid. But when he didn't get a rise out of either one of us, I guess that was when they felt, well, okay, so they let us go. But, and that was just the first of many incidences with Ernie and I, not just with cops, but people. We could be in a crowd and they're, pardon my language, but assholes. There's always one asshole in the crowd that will say something to you. They feel emboldened enough to make some kind of reference to the fact that you're an interracial couple, and it happened a lot. And Ernie, speaking of, you were talking about being followed around, I can't tell you how many times that he came home and told me, well, it happened again. I went into the Dollar General and the manager, the assistant manager, one of the employees followed me around the store the whole time. And this is in the 90s and in early 2000. It happened to him all the time. Or he'd walk into a store and wait for someone to say, like, for instance, he went into a Napa store in Hot Springs, and all the guys behind the desk were white. They all had their heads down, One of them looked up, saw him come in. He stood there waiting his turn, thinking, okay, well, they're busy. I'll wait until someone helps me. And no one ever said, can I help you? Anything. A white guy walked in, and every one of them said, can I help you, sir? And so Ernie said, I just turned around and walked out. He said, I won't go back there. It happened to him a lot. And it hurt my heart every time.
So I had an argument with a lady here in Eureka Springs about, she had commented that she didn't believe in white privilege because she grew up poor and she had to work her way up and pull herself up by the bootstraps, and all that whole American individualistic line of, we've all, as Americans, we all want to believe we started from nothing and everything we are is because of our genius. And, I didn't know how to respond to that. And then a few weeks later, I stumbled across, I think it was a TED Talk, but it was an African-American teacher. And she said, this is how I explain it. She said, it's like we're playing Monopoly. And you white people got to roll the dice 400 times and go around the board and collect your $200 and build hotels and houses and collect property. And you got to do that 400 times before we ever got a chance to. And that was kind of one of those moments, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
But explaining the power of generational wealth, it's hard to get some people to understand that. So, that was one of her themes in the book, is what are these excuses we come up with not to discuss this subject? And one of them was about the American ethic of individualism, and we all start out equal. It's our choice. Poverty is a choice. And it's like, no, it's not, if you know the history behind it. So as you read through that book, were there other excuses that resonated with you?
Well, I have to be honest. I've started the book. I haven't been able to get all the way through it, so I'll have to finish reading it before I can tell you.
Well, that's okay, Mary. I thought we were only supposed to read chapter 1, so I did that assignment. But what I'll say, but I did read the intro and the foreword and all that good stuff. So I get a gold star. But the thing that got me, that has kind of been in my head for a few years now, she says, whoever wrote the intro, says, the way we were taught to define racism makes it virtually impossible for white people to understand it. And I just noticed my husband is also on the screen. Hi, babe. So we're both from the South. I'm from East Texas. and a million other small southern towns. And I don't ever remember people saying, oh, Black people are bad. But I do remember getting the idea from somewhere, not me as a kid. I wasn't born with this idea in my head, but that Black people are lazy and they're all poor and they all live on that side of town and they have their own churches. And, you know, some of them are nice, but if you're walking down the sidewalk, you know, you might want to hold your purse a little tighter. And again, no one ever said that directly. So how did I come to that idea? And it was baked into my DNA by my surroundings, by my parents, by family, by friends, by the people I went to church with, all very good-hearted, hardworking, salt of the earth people. But where did they get the idea? How was it baked into their DNA? Why did it take until I was an adult to learn about some of the largest atrocities happening to the Black community and the rest of the, you know, people of color, the Native Americans, the Asian Americans? And it took well into adulthood to think, oh, it's not just some people are racist and some people aren't. There's a spectrum, and it's all baked into our American DNA. Now, in my elementary school, I think there was one boy from Asia. He was adopted. There were a few Hispanic boys and girls, but their family isn't supposed to be here. Like, there's the Black kids, but you know, they're all in that class where they have to redo the math course because they're not smart enough. And all of that was baked in. And so now it's trying to, where did that come from? And I have caught myself thinking back to when I was in high school, where it was a much more diverse school. I had a lot of Black friends. We were in band together. We were in study groups together. But, and there were quite a few Hispanic families. And so I had friends of all shades. And I think back to the things that probably came out of my mouth, words that were normalized, that were regularly used. And I am mortified that came, because I think I had a good heart back then, but I was merely parroting what I had absorbed around me. And I have tried to be intentional with what my children absorb from me and my husband and from the people around us. And it's been a little easier because we've lived abroad for the past 10 years and we just recently moved back. And we intentionally put them in the most diverse school system in Hot Springs, socioeconomic diversity as well as racial diversity, because we want them to know that this is not the white man's world. The world wasn't made for the white man. It was made for everyone. It was made for all of God's creatures. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, thank you.
I think when, you know, there were a few things that I would hear when I was growing up from my parents. My dad would always be like, well, I'm not racist because I've got, you know, like I'm friends with the Black guy down at the bowling alley and I talk to him and stuff, you know, and stuff like that. But yet my dad made it pretty well known that I better not, basically that if I ever dated a Black man, he'd disown me because Blacks and whites shouldn't date or get married or anything like that. I mean, he was you know, he wasn't racist, but I couldn't, but I couldn't date a black man. I was also being blonde. I remember my parents saying, you know, you need to be careful because black guys like blondes. They like blonde haired girls. So, you know, let me think, what else did I hear? It was mainly about the races mixing type of thing, you know, that wasn't like something that should happen. You know, I know that as I got older, I found myself like if I was out walking by myself at night, I held my purse a little tighter if if I felt like there was a person of color walking behind me, like a man of color. And I've done a lot of soul searching within myself as to why it is I felt that way, where I would feel more nervous if there was a you know, if there was a black man and I was alone type of thing. You know, why would I feel more nervous in that situation? And, you know, the only thing I can come up with is, I mean, it's something that I've really had to consciously try to work through so that I don't think that way, because it was definitely how I was raised. I mean, other than that, you know, I don't recall my parents like making any generalizations about black people, like, you know, they're not as smart or, you know, anything like that. But it was always about the races mixing, that just wasn't right. You should stick with your own race type of thing.
So I think that's what's so great about a group like this is we're, you know, thank you, Blake, for creating a safe space for us to have these conversations. And one of the things that made me interested is obviously with recent history, you know, current events, you know, it's been brought back up to us. So what I hope to do is just to keep doing the work myself. And I have read a few books already. I have 2 daughters that are not white. So, you know, that's another experience that I bring to the group. So I've kind of had their first hand experience, but they still both tell me I don't understand. So I kind of look back at mistakes that perhaps mistakes that my husband and I have made in raising 2 daughters of color. So, but I don't want to, I mean, I definitely want to be self-aware, but what I'm really hoping to do is kind of do the uncomfortable work of examining some of it and understanding other people's experience and how I can just be better and help, I don't know, moving forward, how can I make sure that the rhetoric is different for those around me?
Yeah, I recently had a conversation with a family member who grew up in the 50s, and he was talking about when he was a kid, him and his friends would gather and they would throw, as the little black kids would walk through their neighborhood, they would throw apples and orange, whatever they had, they'd throw it at these kids. And he kind of laughed, and then he stopped because all of us around the table just had this look of horror. It's like, oh my God, you did that? And he stopped, and he kind of, you could tell he was thinking, and he finally said, oh my God, that was wrong, wasn't it? And I think that was the first time in his life that he had ever stopped to think, maybe some of the things I believe and do are wrong. And, you know, I could have in that moment kind of laughed along with him. I could have just, you know, instead I reacted. And I wonder how many of us, you know, we avoid those conversations because we don't want to get into to a fight or an argument or a discussion, or we just know this person is dead set in their ways, so we just let them believe the way they do? And are those conversations we should be having?
Yes.
So,
It's
can you guys?
uncomfortable though, because people get so defensive.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. I've had several fights with people. And
Yeah. Hello, Splinter. Meet Plank.
But if you
So,
don't, you
Can
just,
you guys hear me?
yeah, Tom,
Yes.
go ahead.
I can hear you.
Well, I just wanted to share my thoughts on that because my first thought when you said that is, hell no, I don't want to be quiet about it anymore. And I think it comes from a sense of shame and on my side, because I grew up in Hot Springs, met Michelle, who gave me the courage to leave Hot Springs, and we moved to Atlanta. We saw race relations kind of up front, but we lived out in the suburbs, so we were isolated from it, right? But then, once again, because of her courage, we moved to Asia for 11 years. And I think Kendra was talking about the concept of individuality versus collectivism. And I got to tell you, when I came back to the United States, I couldn't be quiet about it with a lot of people anymore, because leaving, seeing how other people live in Atlanta and seeing the racism that's thrown around very casually there, and then going to Japan and seeing kind of this collectivist reality, which has its problems too, don't get me wrong, but the needs of the many really do outweigh the needs of the few in a collectivist society. And then we came back to the United States in August of 2019, thrust immediately into COVID, and we're like, well, I don't want to get sick. Hell, if there's a 5% chance that a mask will help, I'll throw one on, and it probably is going to save other people, not me, but I'll do it anyway. And then I'm just like appalled by what I see from the country that I thought that I knew so well, of people saying, well, it's my damn right to not wear a mask. It's freedom, you know? And I always say it's freedom, or it's freedom with a TM behind it, because it's not freedom. I mean, so yeah, you are free to screw over your fellow man. You are free to be unkind. You are free to not live the Beatitudes. Is that the freedom that we all walk around and strut around and profess? Whereas the country that we spent the last 11 years in, they have half of the population of the United States, and they have fewer deaths from COVID than the state of Arkansas.
Wow.
Now think about that for a minute. 150 million, 135, 40 million people with fewer deaths than the state of Arkansas, but freedom. We got freedom here. We got freedom. And so individuality plays into this, because if I think that everything I do comes from my own efforts, then I don't give a crap about everybody else's efforts. It's only about what I can do for my family and for myself. Oh, and by the way, Black folks, don't come encroaching on my space, because I got here on my own. You get there on your own. But the reality is that being a good human and also following Christ kind of compels us to say, okay, your problems are my problems, and my problems are your problems, and the needs of the many do outweigh the needs of the few. I'm sorry I keep quoting Mr. Spock here, but it's true, right? And the problem that I have is that I grew up in this, and the shame that I have is that I was absolutely unaware of it. And when a member of my family would make food for all the families, they didn't care if they were black, white, or anything, make food, go help anybody if they were in trouble, very, very nice gestures to anybody, but yet at the dinner table they would say, my goodness gracious, Miss Betsy is the nicest little nigger lady you'll ever meet in your life. And you kind of just, and then I'm 30 years old, and that doesn't even resonate with me. I go away and live in other shoes. I live at other places, and I come back and go, my God, that's horrendous. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous that we would say things like that about other human beings. So I really think, Kendra, to your point, is that collectivism plays a huge role in this, but parts of individuality and individualism is important to who we are. But when we become so individualistic that we start saying, screw everybody else and your problems are your problems, then we're not living the Beatitudes. We're not living as we're supposed to be doing it. We are just living for ourselves. And the political crap that's gone on, and I think Blake will probably attest, he's seen me on Facebook, I can't stand it. And I can't be quiet about it anymore, because I had kind of an awakening, and now I guess I'm stupid enough to believe that everybody else had the same awakening that I did, and I'm only 5% farther along. But I can't be quiet about it. It just infuriates me. And I know that Michelle and I are not acting enough to change it, but it just infuriates me. And when people say stuff like that, I cannot not say something. When Obama said, you didn't build that street, you didn't build that computer network, you didn't build that, it pissed everybody off, right? But the truth is, I'm sitting in this house not because of the stuff that I did, it's because of what other people did. And other people didn't do for Black folks and brown folks and everything else. So I find myself embarrassing my wife sometimes because I can't stay quiet about it.
Well, and Tom, I as been shared in the chat, I resonate exactly with what you're saying. But again, there's assumptions there around politics. And for instance, my in-laws are native Arkansans, diehard Democrats. But what you said you heard at your dinner table, I've heard as well. And, so there's an assumption, oh, I'm a Democrat, that means I'm for Black people. No. And I think that's what's tipping everybody, the apple cart over is all of those lines have been blurred now. And a lot of things have been exposed. It's kind of like, the tidal wave and exposing these dead bones. I think that's what we're seeing is whole systems that no longer work for us, and things that we can't unsee, especially about when I'm talking about myself. Long history there, but that's why I'm here, is because I'm seeing things in myself and hearing things that I know I've said, and I don't. That doesn't work anymore. I guess.
Well, and everybody says, and I'll say one thing and then I'll shut up. But everybody says that, why do we engage in these debates? Because everybody's set in their minds, and I just don't believe that. So I had a discussion. We got this stupid Confederate statue right in the middle of Hot Springs. And Hot Springs, it's like Eureka Springs, like a beautiful town. And I absolutely love it here. Grew up here. And there's this Confederate statue downtown. And friends that I went to high school with who have like multiple degrees, smart people, they're like, look, man, that's my heritage. That's heritage. That's not hatred. That statue teaches us what not to do. And I'm like, really? And the only way that I have ever had somebody to stop and look is I explained it this way. I said, okay, you drive by that statue and you say there's heritage and it's not about hate and that's my forefathers and blah, blah, blah. I said, but I think about a 40-year-old father with a 7-year-old son, and the 7-year-old son says, Dad, I love Hot Springs. I love living in Hot Springs and the people here are pretty nice. But why are they fighting so hard to keep a statue up of someone who would enslave boys like me and whip us and beat us and torture us? Why would the city want to keep that up? And it's like, unless you can get somebody to sit in that car with a 7-year-old kid and imagine what it would be like, nobody moves, because they're all like, no, I got my mind set up. But
well, and
I can't imagine having that conversation with my 7-year-old son. Why does my city want that up there, Dad? I don't know what I would say. I have no idea.
But this is kind of like what Michelle was saying. So much of this is baked in. I grew up in New Jersey. We had the, Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, and we had all, the the Pilgrims and the Indians, and we all ate and sang Kumbaya, and, you know, all of that. And I grew up being told my heritage was something to be really, really proud of, you know, like we go back to the Mayflower kind of stuff, you know. And then I'm doing the genealogy, and I see where one of my ancestors was at the head of a group that annihilated a group of Indians to clear the way, get those barbarians out of the way so we can go in there and farm. It's so baked in that we don't even.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable, and you know, it's making me shaky because I'm feeling it, like the shame. I'm feeling that shame, and how do I make it right? And you know, how do I not appropriate other cultures? You know, there's all of this stuff is all in, you know, for me anyway, it's all in the mix somehow. So I'm just starting here.
So before Ernie, I never thought about those statues or the Confederate flag too much, or at all, really. But I can tell you that from his point of view, I mean, literally, when he would, if we went through, like coming to Eureka Springs, we lived in Hot Springs. He was raised there. I lived there for over 30 years. So, but we'd come to Eureka a lot, and there's a couple of little towns on Highway 7 and up and in that area that you go through where there's a lot of Confederate flags. And literally the first time we went through there, and Harrison, that was another, just going through Harrison, Arkansas, terrified him, absolutely terrified him. Now, he was 17 years older than me, so he grew up in 45. I mean, he was born in 45. He grew up in South Arkansas in Gould, and I can tell you some horror stories about that too. But when we would go through those neighborhoods or the places where there were Confederate flags, I was always the driver. You know, he would say, look, don't speed. Don't, you know, it's like, don't speed. Let's hope we have enough gas to get through here, especially through Harrison. That the first time we went through Harrison, Arkansas, he literally, before we got there, said to me, you know, let's be sure we got enough gas, you know, don't break any laws. I don't want to call any attention to our car. And when we got to the edge of Harrison, he put the seat back and laid down.
Wow.
And that made me cry. I literally cried all the way through Harrison to get to Eureka Springs, because I did not know until that point what that did to him. The thought of running into, you know, a racist that could cause a problem for us literally hit him that hard.
And it speaks to the white privilege that you have, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
that's a perfect example of your white privilege. And
Yep.
and you know, and the thing is, you could drive through Harrison and you can be a white woman and still be targeted.
Yeah.
Because you're a woman, and probably a woman of faith. And so.
Yeah, so true. I have a friend that a black guy lives in Fayetteville, and he and his wife, this has only been 4 or 5 years ago, they went through Harrison from Fayetteville to go into Branson. They stopped at a gas station, and when they came back outside, there was a KKK sticker slapped on the back of their car.
Mm.
One of my good college buddies is an engineer. He lives in Harrison, and he's lived there for about 20 years. And this is a guy with multiple degrees. He's a bright guy, smart guy. And he and I got into it about 3 months ago. And he said, man, he says, you need to come to Harrison. Don't read the news reports. He said, there are no race problems in Harrison.
There's no black people in Harrison.
And I said, there's no black people in Harrison. He goes, oh, no. He goes, there's black people, and they're all real happy. And so I kind of looked it up on the sly, and it's like 0.01%. He probably does know every black person in Harrison, right?
and they're all real happy because they know their place. Right?
Well, and I think that's probably the case. That's probably the case. But that's the awareness of the self-awareness is the problem with not only race relations in this country, it's just most relations in this country. It's infuriating, because if you can take a step back and look at your own actions, you'll find where you've fallen flat, and then you have to learn. You have to be willing to learn from that and to change. And the scary part about it is that times like the last 4 years, where we have been encouraged to show our colors, if we're prejudiced or if we're racist or whatever, all that does is cement that mentality into the average people and uncover it. Because I know I've got a lot of family members that I'm just like, oh my God, I wish I didn't know what I know now about you. I wish you had been in the race closet and continued to stay in the race closet, because I don't want to know, you know.
Well, and to echo what you said, Tom, COVID hasn't helped, because people are really brave behind a keyboard and a screen.
Mm-hmm.
Really, people are really brave. And so that hasn't, I think people have lost socialization skills. And I think people have, been really, the past 4 years, they've been allowed and kind of given permission to speak.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But Blake, and I go back, and probably others of you are history buffs too. I am not, and never paid attention to history. But in her book, she talked about women's suffrage and women's suffrage voting, the voting rights in 1920. So it took men to vote those rights in. So, women, there were women, but women couldn't vote to have their own right to vote. So, which is where we need to do the work. And Tom, you also said, you think everyone else should be doing the work too? I feel you, because I'm like, why doesn't anyone else care? Or why aren't other people talking
Shake
about
people.
this? Yeah, why? Because I have no reason to take this on, but I want to. And so where's the turning point? Because you would think the 60s were the turning point with Dr. Martin Luther King, but it wasn't. And then we were still seeing it in the night. We've seen it through the 90s, through the 2000s. Will we get to the turning point? They're saying it's still going to take 200 more years for women to be considered equal to men. Where is and how do we get to the turning point?
So I want to share something real quick. I started this journey years ago in seminary, and shamefully have to admit that other than some Facebook posts and talking to my friends who agreed with me about everything, I didn't do much about moving the needle with the people over, with whom I might have had a little bit of influence. I'm a pastor. And so Charlottesville kind of tinged me, and we started a group in my community, and interestingly enough, didn't get a whole lot of pushback, but it didn't really go anywhere after the first few months. We had some African Americans and white people meeting together to talk about the issue. And then, of course, this year, after George Floyd, is when I said, okay, I'm not going to be quiet anymore. And luckily, I was appointed to a church where there was actually a group willing to have a conversation. It's a predominantly white church, but there are African Americans there and an African American senior pastor. And so, long story short, is we started a conversation because all the nice white people said that they thought it was the right thing to do, yet only 5 of them came to the table to be in part of the conversation, which has been the most frustrating thing to me in terms of, the commitment I thought this group had made to having a diverse community. And so I've been there 7 months, and I've been having some behind the scenes conversations, and what it comes back to in this book is that there's just there is a lot of white fragility around this matter. Is it's all about my feelings and how uncomfortable it makes me feel to have this conversation. And I'm not a racist. I don't have any ill feelings toward race, toward Black people. And I don't have anything to confess, you know? And so they had started a book study on Be the Bridge, which is pursuing God's heart for racial reconciliation or something like that as the subtitle. And I really found that it was a great resource for bringing the conversation to the about lamenting and repenting, and the author is Black, and she's done a really good job with it. But even as carefully as she tried to craft the conversation to help open white people's eyes, people push back, and they don't want to be made uncomfortable. And so I'm gonna say one other thing real quick because I don't want to dominate. But I heard that they have a resource on their Facebook page. You can join their Facebook page, and they have lots of resources. And it's a podcast called Seeing White, and it's 14 episodes that this John Bewan is his name, produced. And he was interviewed a few weeks ago by Krista Tippett, and I listened to it, and what he said was really profound. He said, we don't need everyone to come to the table and get the point that we need to have these conversations. We just need a critical mass to start turning the tide, just like with the civil rights movement. There weren't a lot of white people involved with the civil rights movement, but there were just enough to turn the tide, right? And start the movement and get bills passed, et cetera, et cetera. And so he said, we just need enough people to be willing to stand up and show people the way to the light, or something like that. And so that's the one thing that's given me hope. And that's why I'm here tonight, to find other groups to have conversations with. Because frankly, I've been talking to a lot of African Americans with whom I agree, but there aren't any white people at the table. So I'm trying to learn from how do we do this. So, okay.
So it's 7 o'clock. We have, I think we're almost to 100 people on this Face group page. And they're all looking for books and resources and videos and your thoughts and ideas. They all can't be on the Zoom on Tuesday night at 6 or Tuesday at noon, but they all want to go on this journey with us. So we're recording this and we'll post it later. But I would encourage you, if you've read a book that we haven't discussed, or you found a newspaper article or a news link, post that on this page so that we can all follow along and learn from it. Next week, we're going to get into caste and the history that I don't think any of us were ever taught, because we've been given this mythology of America that I think is just an absolute lie. I offended a guy just the other week when he was defending the Confederate flag and Confederate statues, and he said, that's my heritage. I said, no, it's not. And he was repeating the myth of the lost cause, that, you know, these people weren't fighting for slavery, but for this noble thing. And I just said,
Yeah.
I said, your grandparents and your parents lied to you. And he went off.
Very well. They did
How
it with
dare
they
you
did it
say
well.
that about my parents?
Right.
And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but that's the truth, because we've all been lied to. And
Yeah.
caste is going to get into that, and that's the book I really want to focus on, because for the first time, she was somebody who took it out of racism and kind of put it in a different narrative that everything started making sense to me, because it's not just about racial justice, it's social justice. Why are women treated the way they are in this society? Why are Native Americans? Why are minorities? Why is anybody but white men treated like they're second-class citizen? And she in caste will really pull that out. So I encourage you to start getting into that book, but also be posting stuff that we can follow along. Several of you threw out some really good books and articles, so I'd like to see that on that private group so that we can pick that up and follow along. But thank you for being a part of this. Feel free to invite anybody you want. We'll do this every Tuesday.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you so much, man.
Everybody.
Blake, so I think I had put a message, but I don't think you saw it. My 18-year-old son is interested in being in the group. Is that all right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, he's not on Facebook. I can share the Zoom link with him.
Okay,
And,
that's fine.
But okay. Okay, Nick, I've got, but anyway, okay. Yeah, he was very interested in joining in. So, okay,
Yep,
very good.
great.
So
Thanks,
Faith,
That's
guys.
him.
Gail?
yeah, I wanted to say something to Faith. My best
Yeah.
friend is Margaret Freeman. Are you her? You know her?
I knew that I knew your name. Yes. Because Margaret and Ernie, if you ask Margaret, Ernie, they were one of the friends. They worked together and
She talks about y'all all the time.
yeah. Oh, sweet. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
All right, good night.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right,
All right,
good
thank
night.
you. Bye.
We thought it was at 7.
6, but it's
Six.
recorded.